Hello, everyone. This is Professor Hamamoto. It is June 23rd, year 2022, 3 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. I hope you're all doing well here in the live chat and in the replay. I'm having an interesting talk for you today. The title, of course, is Sabbatean-Frank, in parentheses, enstein, because I just came across a connection just about 2 hours prior to going live with you today that establishes the Sabbatean Frankenstein as in Mary Shelley, Percy Bysshe Shelley, the quite literal relationship between Sabbatean Frankism and that classic piece of horror fiction with a capital H. It's indeed Luciferian fiction, which we'll get into in a moment. So I'm connecting Sabbatean Frankenstein Origins of Drag Queen Story Hour. It may seem like a stretch, but it's not. This is not simple clickbait. I see these phenomena as being connected with this thread. It's more like a chain. It's a chain that needs to be broken. It's the chain that's been enslaving modern, at least in the Anglo-American world or the so-called West, the Western world. Parts of Eastern Europe and Asia have been resisting it for generations now, but even then it's beginning to take hold. And that is what we know commonly as Luciferianism, right? So there's a connection there. And I'm going to be continuing or building up an area, a theoretical pursuit that is a pursuit in theory with a capital T, just like these people I'm going to talk about consider themselves theorists. They're actually Luciferians. I am approaching them on their own turf by referring to myself as a theorist. Only the difference, the major difference, the primary, the fundamental difference is that I'm involved with New World Order theory, which encapsulates these people I'll talk about in a moment, who are in truth Sabbatean Frankists. So I look at them as phenomena rather than the end point of history, as they like to see themselves, the combination of evolutionary thought and philosophy, the human sciences in history. I see them as being epiphenomena. I see them as being representative of an age-old expression since humanity arose. And we can talk about how that happened at another time, and that's the problem of evil. That's the problem of Satan, and it's a cultural universal, not just in the West. It appears from what the anthropologists, the folklorists, the historians tell us. It seems to be present in any society you want to look at. It could be a small village, complex society. It could be a very complex post-industrial society like America. So I'm connecting that New World Order theory and illustrating today how so-called critical race theory and so-called gender theory, how these are subversive, not just intellectual movements, not just subversive cultural expressions, but are politically subversive. These movements, CRT, the people behind them, they're corporatists, by the way. They're not anti-capitalist radicals. They're capitalist radicals. Supra-cap. These are UN type people. They're globalists who fund all these people who think they're leftists, who come out of the uh, Eastern European radical tradition, primarily Marxism, Bolshevism, which I alluded to at the last talk. By the way, I would refer you to check out the talk on Tuesday if some of this seems to be a little bit beyond your grasp. I kind of lay the foundation on Tuesday. But I return to these themes throughout the last year and a half of my talks. And the reason I'm doing that is because this is the commonality that connects all these different talks. That's the Luciferian impulse. And it's manifests itself openly in so-called Pride Month, right? In such displays as so-called drag queen story hour. And we hear about this ad nauseum, and you've heard me complain and whine and moan about people who just sit there, supposedly in independent media, right? Conservative media, people on our side, whine and name call and say, you've heard me say, do that on and on. And fortunately, I caught myself and saying, listen, I'm going to not let that deter me. I'm going to use that term anyway. I'm going to use that as an occasion to really dig deeply on the foundations of it. So, people here on this channel are far beyond InfoWars level or Ben Shapiro or most of these YouTube type people. So I really don't have to, I'm not really competing with it as such. But the problem is that there's the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, who are fixated by hours upon hours of this type of programming are going to miss what I have to say here. And this, what I'm going to tell you over the next 60 minutes, could very well mean the salvation of the Republic, the American Republic. Hey, that's another one, by the way. I'm sick and tired of hearing conservatives saying they're nitpicking. Well, America's not really a democracy; it's a constitutional republic. Then they go blah 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 blah. Can we move on now? Can we take the discussion a little bit further? As you can see, I view the independent conservative media as being part of another one here. While I'm at it, while I'm kvetching, check out your Yiddish dictionary while I'm kvetching. Another one that's really I'm tired of hearing is, oh, it's spiritual warfare. Now we got to really recognize the fact. Now, what the hell does that mean? We're in spiritual warfare. Is that something you heard, like, G. Edward Griffin talking about, or Joel Skousen back in the day, and you're just repeating this, and it doesn't really mean anything. So let me perhaps flesh that out, so to speak, by this notion of the spirit, the malign spirits that are attacking us, and we're not even recognizing it, partially due to our own myopia. Yes, you see running in the background the Rosicrucian Museum. This is down in San Jose in the belly of the beast, Silicon Valley, not Carbon Valley, not carbon life forms, but Silicon AI Valley, right? And I'm running this in the background to have you know that we're not talking about something that ended in 1666 when Zabatazev died. We're not talking about a movement that is of 350 years or more um, old. Okay, we're talking about 2022. Okay, here's some beautiful. By the way, I've never been there. Well, it's down in San. It's not that far away from me. I always thought, well, I'll get to it someday, but I never got around. The whole COVID psyops happens. I think I'm going to do this summer. I'll make a trek down to the Rosicrucian Library. There's a museum and a garden and whatnot. There's a whole history behind it if you want to check it out. So let me put that on hold there. We're not talking about a 350-year-old movement, right, that comes out of the days of Egypt under the captivity of Jews, right? We're talking about something that was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature only just a couple of years ago. This is a Jewish Polish author. Her name's Olga Tokarczuk. I'm probably mispronouncing her name. It's not a Polish name that I'm familiar with. I think she's probably Hazarian. And I think if one of you want to look at her bloodlines, you'll probably see that she's related to some multi-generational rabbinical family who probably were practicing Sabbatean heresy secretly generations ago. That's my guess. But now they're rolling out all this evil, the Sabbatean-Frankist heresy in public with displays like drag queen, and we're just being misdirected by the fact that they're wearing rainbow wigs and they have beards and they're obese men, right? And of course, on all the independent news, Fox and whatever, they can't stop talking about transgender this, transgender that. Come on, you're just falling for the trap here. Anyway, this book here, I just got the other day. It's called The Books of Jacob. This particular novel is kind of interesting. I was leafing through it. I'm going to read it. I vow that I will read. It looks really good. But who do you think that Jacob is referred to? It's none other than Jacob Frank, Jakob Frank, as in Sabbatean-Frankist. This is a Nobel Prize for Literature in Sweden, which, by the way, Sweden is a hotbed for this, for the satanic black metal music, for example, church desecrations, mostly Protestant or Catholic. Desecrations in Sweden's a hotbed. It's also an area, part of the world, the Baltics, where it's going to the next war could break out there. And I had a guest previously, Pele Taylor, talking about their historic. He's Swedish, English, British, Swedish. There are historical tensions in that region between the Teutonic Knights and all these he doesn't call them a cult. I will call them these occult orders, these religio-military orders that are built upon occult tradition, right? So we see it here very much with us in 2022. Okay. One of the common buzzwords, and I want you to kind of, you don't memorize them, but just be alert to them whenever it comes out of your kid's mouth. You know, the ones who are home from school right now, sponging off of you, who are majoring in comparative literature or English or worse, gender studies. One of the buzzwords you're going to hear out of juniors or your the rainbow-haired daughter of yours, the one with all the spikes in her face, right, tatted up, is one of the terms is transgression, right? We're going to trivialize it out of existence because this is their buzzword. They've been spouting these terms for the last 20 years, and now finally the public is realizing that well, maybe they're not. They think it's just a passing fancy. It's not a passing fancy. In fact, it's so extreme, it's so entrenched, this institution, that you and me, we are going to have to build alternate institutions, parallel institutions to all the social work, schools of education, the universities and colleges that have been, and even law enforcement agencies that have been taken over by the Sabbatean-Frankist heresy. It's that bad. Unless we have divine intervention, we can't rule that out, right? Maybe we'll go back to the days of Noah. But anyway, the term is transgression. The other term you will hear is abjection, and of course, intersexuality, or I'm sorry, intersectionality, which is really intersexuality. That means there's no gender-free society. Okay. These people are about transgression. That is their politics. Their politics is to transgress, to trespass against any moral verity that you and I, or even themselves, were raised on, where they grew up, whether they grew up in the Jewish tradition, the Islam or Christian, or Buddhist, or any of the major or even secondary world religions. They all have a moral core there. The whole idea with the Sabbatean, postmodern, post-structuralist, Frankist movement that started to take hold in the early 70s, late 60s and 70s. I know because I started going into grad school in mid 70s, and that's when I first got my first exposure to it. This is it, by the way, just if I may talk about myself for a moment. This was at the University of California, Irvine, where I did my doctoral work. And I mentioned that because what was going on is that there's this intelligence operation called theory to bring in all these transgressive theorists from the continent. By that, I mean France and Germany to an extent, and then from Britain, right? They're not continental philosophers, but they're a separate line. They're more of the British empiricists and the Tavistock type socialists, as you know, but especially the continental philosophers of France were being brought in the early 70s, and it hit UC Irvine just about the time where I got to grad school. But I didn't know it was an intelligence operation. As you've seen on previous talks here, we know that most of the literary fiction since the 1950s has been a CIA operation run through the Iowa Writers Workshop. And if you've seen a couple of my talks previously, you know that in popular literature, like the magazines, you've got Joan Didion, you've got Anna Wintour. These are people that I keep talking about in the session. At the popular and the National Enquirer, these are also intelligence operations. So they got the highbrow and they got the lowbrow as well. And they got the middle brow. They got the New Yorker, right? That's where J.D. Salinger was being published. So what's the antidote to that? That's you and me. That's me. That's authors like Kirby Summers, whose book, by the way, is just out. And if you're a Patreon subscriber of mine and Kirby Summers, you get to have the latest installment of her work on D.B. Cooper. It's really good. I mean, she gave a talk on that, but if you want a written copy and some more information that she couldn't cover in her talk, then check it out. And that is my pitch to subscribe to my Patreon as well, because this is really beginning to bear fruit for all of us here. I'm very, very excited about this year and a half worth of work and seeing it culminate of all places in Pride Week, right? So, transgression, abjection, intersectionality. Okay, let me say we're in the 21st century, but let me take it back a little bit further, all right, if I may. I promise you this is not going to be boring. Let's go back. It's a book in my library. If you can read it. It says the Sabbatean Prophets. This is a scholarly, this is an academic book. This is not something that you see on those right-wing conservative, well, you do, but it's usually very trivial. And the problem with that is that people think, oh, it's just something that, Joel Skousen came up with or Bloodlines of Illumination. No, this is a legitimate area. Not that they do a bad job, but I'm saying that what they're doing there is occluding the fact that this particular intellectual tradition is very much for real and taken seriously by the people who are controlling us right here and now. They might not know the specifics, right? The generals who are in NATO or the top corporate levels, they probably don't know any of the specifics of this, but this is the zeitgeist in which they're operating. So here's a complete tome on it called the Sabbatean Prophets. And I'm going to talk in a moment, remind you, because we saw them on Tuesday, some of the female Sabbatean prophets. And again, they might not consider themselves to be either Sabbateans or prophets. They think they're radicals, right? But I argued that if you check back their grandparent line or great-grandparent, you took them back to Kiev, right, or Poland, right, Eastern Europe typically, you will find that most of these people that I've mentioned come from a rabbinical bloodline who are probably secretly practicing Sabbateanism or Frankism, right? So this is really a heresy within Judaism. I talked about that on Tuesday, so I'm not going to belabor it. Here's this is for the people who want to jump to conclusions that this is going to be an exercise in Jew baiting or anti-Semitism. No, not at all. No, Sabbatean Frankism has, I would say, metastasized in any major, well, let's say Abrahamic religion, Islam, Christianity, and of course Judaism in particular. I don't know if they said Buddhism, but I suspect that especially American Buddhism is probably being infiltrated by a lot of Sabbatean Frankists right now. That's what I'm seeing. And I know because I remember Buddhism when it was mostly Japanese American, Chinese American. Now they're Christians and there are Sabbateans. They're who are taking control of Buddhism in America. Even the Buddhist church of in L.A., the one I'm familiar with, is run by a non-Asian person. So anyway, but the problem that I'm trying to address here is that the Frankist Sabbatean gravitated towards outside of Central Europe by people like this Baal Shem of London. He was kicked out of the area because he was a heretic. But these guys, such as Baal Shem, I shouldn't call them guys. These are scholars. These are revered rabbinical scholars, right? Even though they were Sabbateans, they are learned men. But they were hanging out with the poets of the times and people like Shelley. I don't know if Baal Shem was a personal acquaintance of of not Shelley, but people like Blake, William Blake, right? You're finally figured out why his poetry was so weird and has all the symbolism, because he was directly influenced by Sabbateanism and probably people like Baal Shem. So the Anglo-American Empire is very much built upon the Sabbatean Frankist foundation. It's the perfect heresy to control people in a huge global empire that was Great Britain. It's perfect for that, right? Because it's about lying, it's about deceit, it's about transgression, it's about incest, it's about father and son incest, it's about human any type of conceivable abomination. It'll be there. And this, of course, Baal Shem also, his thought goes into British Freemasonry, and it intersects with Templar, right? The Scottish. It all comes together in a syncretic collection of imperial metaphysics. Let's call it imperialist evil. That's now worldwide, and now it's reaching its end game, because we thought as long as they were suppressing the brown people and the black people and the yellow people, that people in America, Canada, you're going to be, or Britain, or France, you're going to be okay. No, no, no. The whole idea from the beginning was global domination. So we're all in the same boat. So there's a figure there. I hate to dwell on his ugly mug, but there he is. This is his bona fides, and so I'm just putting this out here so you know that this is not me who's labeling him Sabbatean. This is Jakub Falk. He's a Sabbatean, and here's the Masonic connection, as I mentioned before. This comes from the International Archive History of Ideas. This is an academic work, right? International History of Ideas series, right? And here's some of his bona fides. Notice he comes from he's in London, right? 18th century. And by the way, some of the people here were contributing ideas that later went into the American Revolution, because they are revolutionaries. However, people think that once the American Revolution or the French Revolution was concluded, that it was going to end there. No, these people are into permanent revolution. They are not going to quit until all of humanity is living in an abject, debased situation, so that the Messiah will come back to earth and rescue everybody, right? So they commit sin in order to hasten judgment. I'm really simplifying the theology. I'm not really giving its full, anywhere close to its full impact. You're going to have to read about it yourself. And I'm in no way close to being an expert anyway. I'm just giving you a nutshell. So for those of you who are going to say, well, hey, it's not a Jewish thing. Yeah, it is. But it's also Christian. It's also Islamic, because we know that Jakub Frank and Battai Zeb, they converted to Islam. And Frank even converted to Roman Catholicism, because their idea is revolution. It's not about one religious tradition, one country, one ethnicity, one language group. It's about the whole world dedicated to Satan and Satanism, so that he could be as God, and the peak his adherents can be. You've read the Bible, so I don't need to explain that. So here's this is an Encyclopedia of Jewish Women, Sabbateanism, and this article talks about certain figures, including, by the way, Mrs. Jacob Frank, whose name was Eva Frank, who was the first Sabbatean female Messiah, because this is about bringing in. That's why you have all the women being put forward right here, and that's why all the women who are running the whole transgender operation, gender studies, and this, in a certain degree, critical race theory, they're women, because the next Messiah is going to be a female Messiah modeled after Eva. Again, this is the connection between Central Europe, Sabbatean Frankists, and how it migrated to England, to London specific. That's a hotbed, and which of course migrated to Scotland, Ireland, and throughout the entire colonies, including North America, the United States, and later the Commonwealth of Canada. So there's books, there's literature on this. Have no fear. And here is the first female Messiah. Now, this is another article that comes from JSTOR. It's not me that's saying that. I'm just presenting this as evidence for you to tell you, to inform you that I'm not just making this stuff as I'm coming. I'm putting all these disparate sources together and synthesizing to show us that we are in the last days of the Sabbatean-Frankist messianistic millennial takeover in 2022. So here's Eva Frank. She's Mrs. Jakob Frank. She comes from a beyond Bujan, and this is a review for some of you. This is one of the would-be female messiahs who are heading the transgender post-human agenda. That's Judith Butler. She has a Goy last name. By the way, I understand Goy is considered to be an ethnic slur, but I'll use it anyway. But she's Jewish, and so is her Halberstam. That's Jack Halberstam. Now she's Jack. She used to be Judith Halberstam. You've seen these pictures from last Tuesday. And the reason I mention here, there's Fausto-Sterling, from Brown University. I think she retired. She's from Queens. She's the person that theorized intergender, postgender. I showed it last time. This is her partner, another queer theorist, but she's in theater, right? Do you see a pattern here? There's an overrepresentation of Jewish lesbian women, but forget the lesbianism part and forget the Jewish part. The real point I'm trying to make, it's a Sabbatean Frankist, but they were the ones who they probably come from the rabbinical bloodlines. This is something for future research that you can do, right? I think you're going to find that maternal bloodline connecting all that, right? So they're the pioneers, right? That's why you're going to see them overrepresented here. But they're also recruiting people from the Latinx community. I see Latinx because certain lesbianic Latina feminists said that the Spanish language, the beautiful language of Cervantes, is sexist because it ends with an O or an A to denote gender. So we're going to call it Latinx. So the Sabbateans say, hey, there's too many Jewish lesbian women who are involved here. So we got to put some Latinx in there. We got to get some of those really entertaining Chinese people that we like to laugh at on Saturday at the Chinese restaurants. We got to put some of those there. We got one at Yale University, Lisa Lowe. She's got an endowed chair. I think she also comes from an intelligence background from Chinese American Kuomintang or spy. I found out, by the way, that most of the Asian American studies, all the people who run those, their families and the gatekeepers, the people who ran the journals in my field, supposedly, which I've left, as you might imagine, all came out of a U.S. Military intelligence. And some were co-opted or not co-opted. They're consistent with communist cells in the United States, much of which is based here, right here in San Francisco, by the way. So that's Andrea Dorgan. She's another character that I mentioned before. Let me move on here. This is a character that I came across just recently. His name's Per Faxneld. Man, that sounds like such a great pagan name, isn't it? I wonder if it's even his real name. I don't think so. He's Swedish by nationality, if he even acknowledges it. But most Swedes have Christian names. But so I think he probably changed it. And he says, "I'm going pagan. Not just pagan, because pagan could be a code word for Sabbatean, could be a code word for Luciferian, and he is a Satanist. He is a Luciferian. He's a scholar. He got his PhD at the University of Stockholm, I think. Can't remember. One of the top institutions. I don't know where he's teaching now, but he has a couple books out, and I'm ordering one. They're very expensive. They're academic books. Thank you, Patreon people, who allow me to look at their material here. But here's one of his essays that I found online in the public domain. It's called The Cult of Carnality, and I'll show you where this is taking us. And ironically, it's led to the death of some of these very same reprobates who are trying to push this evil on us. They think it's going to take us out. They think it's going to take our children out down this pathway, and it's going to send humanity into this cul-de-sac called post-humanism or transhumanism, right? Where no one's going to breed. There's going to be no genders. They think that's what they have in store for us. Well, guess what? they are going to be biting their own tails, and it's already happening. I'll give you an example in a moment. So here's his writing partner, whoever, I don't know who Peterson is. And notice he's got a pagan middle name, Jesper. This is part of what you remember I talked about earlier, Sweden being the home of black metal and a lot of satanic resurgence. And I talked about in other contexts, Stieg Larsson, who's a leftist, he's a Marxist, communist. So he doesn't really want to look at non-material forces because he believes in the forces of production. That's classic Marxism. And he was killed because he was saying, hey, there's a whole Nazi substrate within Swedish society. What Stieg Larsson, this is the guy that wrote the books, the girl who kicked over the hornet's nest, right? That's Stieg Larsson, later made into movies. There were even some crappy American remakes of the Swedish original films. I'm talking about that Stieg Larsson. He did not look at the occult substrate of the Swedish Nazis that he was pursuing as an investigative journalist. That's what he was originally, an investigative journalist, not a best-selling author. And he died right before the movies and the books were published, coincidentally. And this is one of the books by, let's see, I'm getting ahead, by Andrea Dworkin, right? You saw her picture earlier. 20th century edition, Andrea Dworkin. So you see, she's got legs, man. Her thoughts are enduring into subsequent generation of wannabe post-gender, transgender, gender theorist, women's studies, academic feminists, right? This is her book, which I alluded to on Tuesday, that says any type of intercourse with men is by men, males, is by definition rape, right? And by the way, this is the book that Matt Taibbi mentions in his interview with Dansky, the woman who was a leftist criminal attorney who said, hey, what happened? Our movement got hijacked by a bunch of fabulous, fable makers, right? So he read this in college, and I think he became a superficial leftist. So I think Taibbi can be salvaged. I don't know about some of these other, Dwork. Well, she's dead now, but they're far too gone. Now, just to show you that this is not an anti-Jewish rant, anti-Jewish, lesbian, leftist, Marxist, communist, Sabbatean-Frankist rap by me. This is the kindly Judith Reisman. She's a Jew. She couldn't get a job in either public or private institution because they're all controlled by the Frankists and the Sabbateans. The only place, because she has a PhD, and she's a professor by training, educator, right? And a writer. That's how I found out about her work on Kinsey, which I'll get to in a moment. She couldn't get a job at any of these institutions where Jews are overrepresented. Most of them are, think that they may not say it specifically, but they think that they're beyond Judaism. They're beyond Christianity, but beyond Islam. They're beyond it all. They are the ultimate in transgression. So that's Reese. She died about a year or two ago. Here's here in an uncharacteristic. Usually she's scowling and looks pretty angry, but usually she looks very happy. But the only place where she get a teaching job is a Christian college, Christian universities. Right, you're not going to get a job in academia unless you go along with the post-human agenda. It's not going to happen. That's why I say we have to create our alternative institution. It's not going to happen. It's too far gone. Right, it's going to have to crumble like Sodom and Gomorrah. Got to move on from that. And same with the other institutions, right? Okay, let me move. Here's the book that really turned it around for me. I heard about someone called Judith Reisman, who was one of the first people who was attacking the great Alfred Kinsey, right, of the Kinsey Report, the male human sexuality, then later female human sexuality, the book that supposedly revolutionized gender relations, sexual relations, starting in the 50s, played up by Hugh Hefner. And if you're reading the latest And I didn't go through it, line by line, but I saw the headlines. If you're looking at the latest newsletter by the author Kirby Summers, she's going in on Hugh Hefner as being an intelligence asset who was promoting it in Playboy magazine. I read Playboy when I was a kid and as an adult. Okay, that's part of anybody who's a boomer knows about Hugh Hefner and just like we know about D.B. Cooper and the Dukes of Hazzard and Bewitched, and we all have these similar touchstones. Hugh Hefner is one of them. So anyway, this is the first thinker in academia. There are a lot of Christian conservatives who are attacking Kinsey, but this is the first person, supposedly on the other side, in the academic side, who attacked Kinsey for his immorality, his deviance, as well. If you want to zap him on his methodology, his flawed science, you could do that as well. She covers all of it. So this is I think this is the first one, and then she's written a couple other ones on it. But she did not talk about Kinsey in terms of his Luciferian commitment too. Anyway, can't have it all, but she did a great. Here's another critique. This is not by Judith Reisman. It's by another author, Kinsey Corruption Expose. I don't know. This is a short book. I don't know who wrote it. I don't know anything about the person. Here's one of Judith Reisman's articles, reliance on Kinsey's scientific, quote unquote, which means it's not science, fake science, child sex atrocities, and how it affected. See, this is where it's a problem. You have all kinds of crooked science. You got Robert Malone. I think probably I'd say about 75% of those research articles, and even the top journals, have some serious methodological flaws, experimental flaws in there. And retraction of these papers is a way of life, even at the top-notch research institution. I'm talking about the sciences, not talking about articles in in fact, articles in humanities and English and even the social, they're rare because you can get away with a lot. But in the empirical side, the lab sciences, those articles are being retracted all the time. So she zaps them on this and her critiques run up. But you can see her, she's only a visiting professor of law. I don't think she ever had a tenured position. And she's at Liberty University. And from what I understand, I think it's a Christian conservative institution. And they invited her with open arms. And her students were the better for it. Okay, so I gave you a review of some of the main players there, right? Andrea Dworkin and Judith Butthead and all these other superstars that have endowed chairs, right? But here's the person who is the most danger of them all. I didn't mention her Tuesday, so I'm doing so now. Her name is Donna Haraway, and I think she's retired now. I don't know if she's still alive, but she was at the University of California, Santa Cruz, not far from where I am. It's about a 3-hour, depending on the track. It's down by Silicon Valley, but it's beautiful, right on the Monterey Bay, Santa Cruz, right? So that's where she made her bones as the feminist scholar who is the one who's most aggressive about promoting the post-human future that's going to be run by AI and cyborgs. I think it was in 1988, and I read this when it came out. She wrote a manifesto. All these leftists, all these these cutting edge intellectuals, they love their manifestos, don't they? So she wrote a manifesto, not the Communist Manifesto. It was called the Cyborg Manifesto. Ooh, but don't laugh, because people are still referring to it, and their projects are geared towards that manifesto done all those years ago, 1988, when she was down in UC Santa Cruz. I think she has an endowed chair, of course, because that's part of the deal. You get the prestige and the money, and you get to cavort with Lucifer. So she's the one that's behind people like Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, Pierre Omidyar of PayPal, the whole Silicon Valley post-human mafia. They might not even know Haraway by name, or René Girard, who Peter Thiel was a student of René Girard at Stanford University. Most of the people are in California, because that's where Silicon Valley is. But this is her brainchild. So remember that name. Right? This is published, I think, in one of the leftist The Guardian or something, one of the British papers, because the British establishment is very much into cyborgian theory and post-human green ideology, right? BP, beyond petroleum. They really mean BH, beyond humans, right? Because remember, the Sabbatean-Frank has migrated from Central Europe to London. And it took root there. And they said, this is how we're going to maintain, little island nation, this is how we're going to maintain rule forever into perpetuity. Just eliminate most of the human population. It's going to make it a lot easier. So that's Donna Haraway. Oh, she's a nasty character. This is the famous Cyborg Manifesto. By the way, I should tell you, because supports my contention that these people were red diaper types. They're radicals, communists, Bolsheviks, right? Especially the Jewish lesbian feminist whose grandparents came from Poland and Eastern Europe and Hungary, fleeing persecution, very real persecution, and came to America and continued to claim persecution and continued to subvert the government here in America. That's your Judith Butler and all these other characters, right? Jack Halberstam, and there's some secondary level when I'm just pounding the names, the name brands there for you. But to validate my point here, this first article, this path-breaking journal article, appeared in what? The Socialist Review, right? It has an explicit political agenda, right? You've heard of guaranteed income and all this, and social score and everything that has to do with the socialized techno society. It's coming from these people that I'm talking about, and they're Sabbateans. The world's going to be run by cyborgs, okay? So it was published by Socialist Review, okay? Socialist Review, and I know because I used to subscribe to these journals. I was a grad student. I was a very diligent grad student. And what do grad students do to learn their craft, to learn their trade? They subscribe to the academic journals to see all the cutting edge articles and to be up on who's up and who's down and who gets name checked here and there in the citations. So I subscribe to the Socialist Review that was published in the Bay Area here. I think out of Berkeley, probably funded by some capitalists, the same people that funded the Weather Underground, Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn. They're probably creating these journals as well, the publishing houses, the movie houses, all of it, right? It's total, it's black money, it's dark money anyway. It's funny money. It's not you and me type money. They have endless resources to pump this out. So they have all these academic journals, one of them the Socialist Review. But before it was for Socialist Review, if I'm not mistaken, it was called Socialist Revolution, coming out of Berkeley, right? Explicit Maoist, right? Marxist. There was some, some interness, some fights, some doctrinal infighting within the journal, but it was called but the revolutionary purport of this publication was explicit. But they realized that middle America, everyday people, even academics, revolution is not something they want to see in a time of prosperity, right? So they said, okay, we're going to call it Socialist Review, and we're going to stop focusing on economics and labor unions and strikes and labor actions, and just like they were doing in the 20s and 30s. That was our grandfathers were doing that sort of labor activism. That's not going to work in the time of 60, 70 economic plenitudes. So we're going to go with gender. We're going to go with race. That's going to be the substitute proletariat to make a revolution, to bring into the satanic reality that we've been hoping for ever since the time of the great heretic Battai and his chief disciple Jakub Frank and the first female Messiah Eva Frank. All right, here's one character who you'll never hear about. I'm glad I didn't. I was going to run you a little video here that talked about him. His name is Georges Battai. This guy here is the most perverted novelist and writer and thinker. He comes from France because remember, I told you this is part of a U.S. Anglo-American psyops. They brought all these intellectuals and they're writing from Paris, from France, right? It wasn't just Jean-Paul Sartre, but he became passé after a while. He was okay in the immediate post-war period with existentialism, but then they brought the post-structuralists in, right? Who focused on sexuality and they focused on abjection. They focused on transgression. They wanted to obliterate sex. They wanted to advocate pedophilia. And this is people like Michel Foucault, who used to do yearly residences at Berkeley, right? And on his time off, all his acolytes, all the grad students especially, were hanging off his nuts saying, "Oh, Michel Foucault, please impart your Gallic wisdom. Tell us everything about your intellectual heritage." He doesn't talk about Satanism, but he talks about it. He's a great scholar so far as medieval scholarship is concerned. He's an archivist. That's how he was trained very well. So was Battai, by the way. He was also an archivist. But they never talk about Battai would, but not Foucault. But anyway, on his time off from Berkeley, when he wasn't trying to get away all the queer and lesbian grad students who were hanging off his nuts, he would take the BART across the bay, go to San Francisco, and spend all night at the bathhouses. Now, why am I telling you this piece of literary gossip or intellectual academic gossip? Because later on, he died of AIDS-like a disease, right? That's Michel Foucault. And he's the guy who's one of the most significant proponents of the so-called transgressive sexuality, which the GLBT movement. Okay, so here's some articles, right? I'm not going to belabor these. Buggering Freud and Deleuze. Even the great Freud is going to be sodomized and Gilles Deleuze toward a queer theory of masochism, right? That's all part of the transgression. We're going to glorify and romanticize sadism and masochism. Remember last Tuesday I talked about Leopold von Sacher-Masoch, right? Who, by the way, I forgot to mention, Sacher-Masoch was related to Marianne Faithfull, who was the girlfriend of Mick Jagger, who was also running in these circles. She's still around, by the way. And she went from singing as this beautiful English schoolgirl type solo song produced by Jagger to this voice that sounds like she gargled it with glass. Broken English is it's a good album, though, I hate to say. So here's another one. The aesthetics of repugnance, the pornology of masochistic fiction. These people are not condemning it. They're celebrating it. They're worshiping it. They are lionizing this type of literary expression because this is all part of the Sabbatean-Frankist MO. Reduce humanity to scum. Make them hate themselves and hate everybody. This is why you go to a demo and you see these people and they want to tear your head off because they hate themselves. Most of all, they've been taught to do so. One more bit of academic balderdash. This is University, Oxford Handbook of Improvisation and Dance, right? Unpredictable maneuvers. I don't know who Eva Karshak is, but the point is it's an article, it's an entry in a handbook, a dictionary, let's call it an encyclopedia of modern dance, because a lot of it comes out of dance, comes out of performativity, comes out of acting. They're all totally into queer theory. They're all totally into Sabbatean-Frankism. They're totally into gender fluidity and the fashion industry. It's like full spectrum buggery of the heterosexual normies, right? That's why we have to create our separate institutions and let these collapse and implode amongst themselves and let them commit suicide, quite literally, right? So forget about the title of these academic articles. Really like to pretend that they're putting forth something profound. So they have these highly inflated titles like unpredictable maneuvers, right, with the British spelling or the French spelling. The point is, here's the author, Duran George. Now, let me tell you, to finish up this particular video presentation, let me tell you what happened to Duran George. He was an assistant professor. Well, let me just read you from the LA Times article. Here's one of his performance piece. It's called the Axis Dance Company, the Anxiety and the Afterglow. I'm just showing the first page of it. But notice it's a dance work that features prominently a wheelchair, right? And here's another phrase that you got to be on the alert for. They're going to be, they meaning the propagandists, right? NATO, DARPA, all the major ad agencies, which are intelligence agencies going back to Edward Lansdale and even Breakfast Club boy, right? He comes from advertising, and people who created The Simpsons come around. They're going to be promoting disability studies. And that's the idea that you've got to chop off your leg, cut your weenie off. These people are differently abled, and they're the ones who should really run the world. So the master cylinder in the AI world is going to have no arms, no legs. He's just going to be a head, right? Anyway, that's the end game that I'm foreseeing. But that's why they're doing these types of dances, these performances featuring wheelchairs, right? Because it's all about disabling the beautiful human body. We're going from the Vitruvian man of Leonardo, right? Not DiCaprio, but Da Vinci, right? You know the it looks like a pentagram, but it's a human being in perfect golden ratio proportion. That's called Vitruvian Man, which, by the way, all these lesbian Sabbateans like to make fun of the Vitruvian Man. They want to see basket case man. They want to see basket case person or individual as an en route to just cyber silicon brain quantum computing entity, right? So this is Duran George. Okay, be patient. Here's the kicker. Let me enter full screen so I can read it along with you. Here's the kicker, lady. This is how Professor Duran George wound up with all his transgressive scholarship, all this cutting edge au courant continental philosophy a la Michel Foucault, right? And Gilles Deleuze and Georges Bataille, right here at UCLA, only 47 years old. Man, he could have had many, many more productive years. He dies sudden death during recreational mummification bondage. You're not hearing it from me. You're reading it with your own eyes from the Los Angeles Times. And they're a little bit delicate about it, probably because what the hell we've never seen a story like this before. You know, we covered the earthquakes and the Watts riots and the Koreatown attack by Mexican immigrants attacking Korean merchants. Sometimes it's called the LA riots. I call it the anti-Korean riots because Asians are targeted. They're the ones who are targeted of pogroms more than any other group in modern times, because they're the ones who are working in these communities. So he's 47 years old. He dies of recreational mummification bondage. Now they put it in quotation marks. I'm glad they're not normalizing, but yeah, it was just a simple matter of recreational mummification bondage in a sex dungeon, which is not under quotation marks. So I guess they think it's normal. Maybe it is normal in LA. There's a lot of underground dungeons in LA. There's rumored to be underground dungeons at the Playboy Mansion. There's rumored to be underground dungeons and tunnels at the Getty Mansion, right? They all seem to connect with each other. So maybe sex dungeons are well known to the editorial staff of the LA Times. I'm just such a square, I think it's kind of a strange formulation, sex dungeon. And guess what? He's a 62-year-old Hollywood exec. He comes from the television industry. I'm sorry for laughing, but I mean, is that predictable or what? Right? He's got this, younger man, 47, who's into kinky stuff like this other dude. Let's get this guy's name. What is it here? Yeah, his name is, it's in public articles, so I'm not libeling him or anything. His name's William Morris. No, wait a minute. His age, his representation is William Morris Endeavor. That's the William Morris. company. I think the great, I'm being sarcastic, the great intellect, the mind, the person who has never been known to turn down a major interview, Jordan Peterson, the limited hangout from the Commonwealth of Canada. I think he's represented by the William Morris agency, or creative artist agent. He's one of the few academics I know that has his own agent. Am I jealous? No, not really. I think he's a fraud though, and but he sucks a lot of oxygen out of the environment. He's a Prozac head, and he's not all there, but people think he's just Mr. Profundity. It's like listening to that guy and being there. You know, the old Peter Sellers movie, written by another fraud, another Sabbatean, Jerzy Kosinski. So who's the guy that he was caught out with? The Los Angeles home of Skip. I can't read a small print for me. Skip Chasey on November 22nd. Right. So it's public knowledge. You can probably find the autopsy. I should find the document to see how officially his death was listed. So that's your Duran George. That's how it ended for him. Not very pleasant, not very nice. And if I sound like I'm gloating, I don't mean to. I'm just saying that, hey, if you play with fire, don't be surprised if you get burnt. Okay, let's see, let me wrap up here. We know where this is going. It's leading to the post-human reality. They may not argue that. They may not recognize it. They might not acknowledge it. But all the social sciences, right, from the bioscience, School of Pharmacy, all the way to the humanities area. Most of these people that I talked about earlier are from literature, the humanities, comparative literature, and in the history department, right? The UC Santa Cruz, we have Donna Haraway. She was the head, I think, maybe affiliated with a program called the History of Consciousness. The History of Consciousness. Yeah, she's leading us into a post-human future, her affiliation with the History of Consciousness at UC Santa Cruz. So, but it's there too. The entire university enterprise has manifested itself as full-on Sabbatean Frankist now, right? Let me just, as a sidebar, speculate whether the fact that during the 1970s, Santa Cruz, the little beachside resort town where Donna Haraway had an endowed chair in the history of consciousness, Santa Cruz, by the national news media as well as the local newspapers, declared the little tiny, slightly sparsely populated county of Santa Cruz as being the serial murder capital of the United States of America. Can you imagine that? I think there is a connection with that and the fact that these people were doing research in these post-human areas, not just humanities. And by the way, Haraway was trained as I think, an engineer. Most of the other people come from literature, theater, dance, sometimes music, but they're usually in the soft side. But she comes from the hard side. So when she talks about cybernetic, she's not talking about science fiction. She's talking about it from an engineering perspective as a hardcore feminist that's going to obliterate gender so that we can get rid of all human problems. Because guess what? There are going to be no humans to create problems, right? That's in their adult fantasy, the same type of fantasy that goes in for recreational mummification. I don't know if she's involved with it, but it wouldn't surprise me. So I think there's a correlation. I gave a talk earlier on Edmund Kemper Jr. the second, 6'9" serial killer who was prowling the Santa Cruz area, the South Bay. He would sometimes go to the Bay Area, and he would look for female college students, right? The same ones that we're learning about women's studies, I guess, early days of gender studies, and he was killing them. This is Edmund Kemper, and he lived in Santa Cruz. And guess what? His mother worked. She was a staff member at UC Santa Cruz. And there's the family who lived in Santa Cruz County in a It's in a mountain area, Soquel, I think it's pronounced Soquel, a wealthy, a well-to-do Japanese American uh, optical, I think it was ophthalmologist, a eye surgeon, let's put it in those terms, wealthy with a large family. He had like 4 or 5 kids and a wife. Some crazed killer, right? This is another one of those supposed crazed killers that appear seemingly out of nowhere. Now we know that they're programs out of Operation Chaos, right? They're the same ones who are trolling the areas around the Lawrence Livermore lab or Lookout Mountain down in Los Angeles. It seems like they turned out, or the Ted Kaczynski, right? Turns out that there's usually some kind of intelligence entity that's operating him. But this one crazed killer broke into the Victor Ota home, killed him, tortured him, and before killing him and his wife and a couple of his, I think three or four of his children. They're all school age, and 2 of his daughters were, I think, in boarding school, so they escaped. But they were the only 2 survivors of that immediate family of the Ota family, who, by the way, grew up in a concentration camp in America. That's why a lot of this doesn't really surprise me. This is American history. This is now a continuation of this whole Sabbatean evil that we've seen going on even in pre-colonial times. It was already being written about by people like Edgar Allan Poe and later Herman Melville, Fenimore Cooper, the people that I like to talk about from time, and more recent authors as well, right? So there you have Victoria, and that's just a couple of the more glaring examples of Santa Cruz as being a very important power center for the Sabbatean-Frankist movement, the takeover that's in its endgame right now in 2022. So stop laughing at them. Stop calling them names. Stop, quit with the self-satisfied chuckles about how stupid they are with drag queen story. These people mean business, man. They mean to put you out of the evolutionary world. It's gonna end with us. That's part of their agenda, and of course, they may not realize it, but they are funded by this highest level Luciferian, I don't know, group of 9. They tend to like the number 9. I don't know who they are, but those are the ones who are at the very, very top. Oh, also, I forgot to mention that it's no coincidence that UC Santa Cruz is also where the Human Genome Project was born. That's when it was first thrown out with an assembly, a conclave of all the best bioscientists in the country. So we are going to catalog the human genome, right? That's where the inception was, right? UC Santa Cruz. And of course, we see all the different offshoots, the manifestations of this great evil. And we're going to keep seeing them until we get serious about it and turn off Owen Schroyer and chuckling and braying like a jackass about the crazy bearded men with rainbow wigs who have, children. I mean, it's awful. It's abhorrent. We know that. We know Fox News, Tucker Carlson or some of these other, we know about transgenderism. You talk about it incessantly, but you're skimming the surface just like it was planned to do. If you who are watching this want the American public to have a deeper knowledge and a means to prepare themselves against this Sabbatean Frankist attack, then please share this video. Break the shadow ban. Send it to all your adult children in college and university. Say there's at least one sane person who has been through a doctoral program, who was taught at a Research One institution, the University of California, Davis, has gone through the graduate school, who has experienced and seen this first person, right? Not from some website or from some YouTube. I lived it, all right? So there's some veritas and gravitas in what I'm putting down for you today. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I say peace out. I want you to have a good weekend despite it all. Don't let the bastards get you down. Treat yourself to a nice meal. Have a glass of California wine. We have some good ones. with your best girl, go out for a walk, take the dog out to the park, live your life, and don't cower in fear against these miscreants. Because you know what I observed firsthand? I was in their offices. I faced Linda Katehi, the ex-chancellor, University of California, and her Jesuit advisor sitting in the corner with his notepad checking me out. But they're little people. They're scared. They're weak. They can be, not easily because they have resources, but they can be defeated. Those are the words I'm leaving with you today. All right? So go out there and have some fun. Live your life. We're going to be around for a lot longer than these people because we don't typically go in for recreational mummification, do we? No, we don't. All right. Thank you. Bye. That's enough fooling around. Bye.